President Trump celebrated what he's calling a win Wednesday following an election in Ohio's 12th congressional district that's still officially too close to call. In a tweet, he predicted a red wave this fall and also boasted that all 5 of the candidates he endorsed won their race Tuesday night, though 2 of those races still don't have a clear winner because they're so close. And now one reliably red district may also be in play for November after Republican Congressman Chris Collins of New York was arrested and charged with insider trading on Wednesday. He's accused of tipping off his son and others to sell stock in an Australian drug company before results of a failed drug test became public. Now, he was the first member of Congress to support then-candidate Trump and even spoke in support of him at the Republican National Convention.
We in Western New York know Donald Trump is not merely a candidate. Donald Trump is a movement. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I have the honor of seconding the nomination of Donald J. Trump as the next President of the United States of America.
The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York outlined the case against Collins earlier at a news conference.
As alleged in the indictment, Congressman Collins cheated our markets and our justice system in 2 ways. First, he tipped his son to confidential corporate information at the expense of regular investors, and then he lied about it to law enforcement to cover it up. These charges are a reminder that this is a nation of laws and that everybody stands equal before the bar of justice.
Now, prosecutors allege that Collins passed along secrets to his son in June 2017. Collins was actually at the congressional picnic at the White House when he received word of a clinical failure of a drug made by the pharmaceutical company Innate. Collins was a member of Innate's board and held nearly 17% of the company's stock. CBS News has video of the congressman on the phone at the time, alleged by prosecutors to be the moment he was informing his son of the failure of the drug. There it was. Caitlin Huey-Burns is a CBSN political contributor and national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. And Ayesha Rascoe is in Washington. She's a White House reporter for NPR. Thank you both for your time. Caitlin, the president obviously campaigned on draining the swamp. This seems pretty swampy. Do we know if he's distancing himself from Collins after this?
This is very swampy, and we haven't really heard yet, but we have seen a pattern with the president that kind of goes as follows. Either someone connected with him that does something swampy, as we've been describing it. He either kind of distances himself and kind of downplays the significance of that person in relation to himself, or he tells people that he feels badly for the way they are being treated. So we'll see kind of how the president games this out. Of course, this is separate from anything involving Russia, any other probe going on, anything involving the president at this point. But what's very telling about this is that the president did campaign on, getting rid of the status quo in Washington. This is a direct violation. And Chris Collins, of course, was the earliest supporter of Donald Trump. He came out and supported the president, or then in the running for the Republican nomination, when nobody else would give him the time of day. And so he might feel an affinity towards him or might just write him off.
And speaking of coming out early, Ayesha, House Speaker Paul Ryan came out early and removed Collins from the House Energy and Commerce Committee. He's, of course, up for re-election, as everyone in the House is in the fall. We've seen other Republicans dodge this sort of thing. Michael Grimm won re-election in 2014, even as fraud charges swirled around him. What do we think this means for Collins in the midterms?
I think it's unclear right now what this is going to mean, whether he'll be able to hold on with this kind of hanging over his head. It is a reliably red district, a Republican district, so it doesn't seem likely that it would change over to Democrats. But so that impact might be muted, but it will be interesting if in this day and age he'll be able to hold out.
Is anyone notable using the R word resign yet?
Not that I know of. I think that right now it seems like people are going to want to wait and see how this plays out, how he handles it. That may be a deciding factor for him, whether he loses support. And as we were talking about earlier, whether he loses the support of President Trump. President Trump is known for sticking by at times. Those people have been loyal to him early on. He values those people who supported him in the very beginning. So it will be interesting to see whether he cuts ties or not.
Yeah, and Caitlin, you wrote something about loyalty that we'll be talking about later in terms of Trump's support of congressional candidates. Yeah. But Ayesha talks about the difficulties that Democrats would have taking this pretty red part of New York.
Right.
Is it just doesn't matter what comes out about this guy because of the composition of the district, or what's Democrats' chances here?
They're very slim at this point, at least on paper. This is a deep red Republican district, also a district where Trump's approval is very high. So even if Collins were to step aside, which doesn't seem likely, he's saying that he's sticking this out, that Republicans would likely be able to get a candidate in there and be okay in November. But we do see in deep red districts that shouldn't be competitive at all. Example, Ohio 12 last night and some others across the country are becoming more competitive. So, it's never good when a Republican or a Democrat, no matter what, is involved in something like this in terms of their seat. But this is one of those seats, just the DNA is very much Republican.
Okay. Another thing happening Wednesday, Ayesha, was the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, goes on another presidential lawyer, Jay Sekulo's radio show, and confirms a story that had come out earlier saying that Trump's legal team has responded to special counsel Robert Mueller and saying, no, we do not like the terms you're proposing for a possible interview with Trump. We don't know exactly what this debate over the terms are, I suppose, but what do we know, if anything, about what the discussion is between the two sides?
Well, it seems like what Rudy Giuliani and the rest of the president's legal team wants, they want to narrow the discussion and the questions that Mueller would be able to ask the president. And so they want to limit that scope. They keep talking about they don't want the president to be caught in a so-called perjury trap or basically to the president to be set up to say something untruthful, in which case he would be breaking the law if he said something untruthful to Mueller when he was being interrogated. So that's the question. I think what is most interesting about this is that you don't hear Mueller talking about offers and counteroffers. This is all coming from the president's legal team, that they're talking about, they're negotiating and making kind of a big show of the fact that they're negotiating over whether the president will sit down with Mueller. And ultimately, Mueller could decide that he wants to try to force the president's hand. Giuliani says that he doesn't have that he argues that he doesn't have the power to do that, to force the president to sit down to an interview, but that would be up to the courts to decide.
Yeah, so that's an important point. I guess question number one is why the president would even want to sit down with Mueller, and then I guess question two is if he doesn't, then what?
Well, I think President Trump says he wants to sit down with him because he feels like he can make a case for himself. He can say, basically if he sits down with him, he can explain away or explain his actions. His legal team does not say they do not want him to sit down because they are concerned that there could be inconsistencies or that something could happen. You never know when you're sitting down with a special counsel what could happen, and you've already had people indicted for not telling the truth in some of these interviews with the FBI. So President Trump says he does want to sit down, and now there's this big tug of war that it might be useful for the White House to show that they're looking to cooperate or trying to cooperate, and then if it doesn't work out, they can kind of blame it on Mueller.
Caitlin, what are the politics around the timing of this, and do we think it's going to happen before November?
Right. November is fast approaching. We're in the home stretch of the primaries, getting into midterm election season. This is not something that Republicans want to deal with. No, even as the White House doesn't want to deal with this either. At this point, there is also, of course, the potential for any kind of October surprise that Republicans are trying to mitigate already in this difficult environment for them. I think Ayesha brings up a really important point about the strategy coming from the White House here and why we're hearing so much much from them. There's a big part of this is trying to win the argument in the form of public opinion and kind of trying to push the public relations element of this, the president trying to, and the White House team trying to say, look, we're willing to sit down and we're trying to negotiate all of this and we have nothing to hide. Meanwhile, of course, there are lots of concerns. The drip, drip, drip of the nature of this investigation raises alarm bells not only for those inside the White House, but of course, Republican candidates who are going to be on the ballot and have to deal with this sort of thing.
Yeah, a lot more to talk about on the ballot questions. And Caitlin and Ayesha, stick with us. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the show. Stand by.